Dario Calmese is the Renaissance man. He is truly amazing. He has a background as a performer, a singer, dancer, and as an actor. He has two undergraduate degrees, one in psychology and one in mass media communications. The Root named him one of the most influential African Americans in 2020 under 45. He's truly an impressive individual. Dario's an artistic director, a curator, producer, writer, and host. You have to check out the Institute of Black Imagination podcast. And I dare say he's an educator. If you want to talk about contemporary fashion, he's directed the production of the Calmese show 6 times. It has become one of the coveted tickets at the Fashion Week, during Fashion Week. Dario has brought his particular brand of Black brilliance to Adobe, where he recently designed a series of photographic application presets to enhance the skin tones of people of color. I'm going to let him talk a little bit about all the stuff that he does, but you can, one of the most significant for me is that he is the first Black photographer to shoot for the cover of Vanity Fair. I make sure that my students know his name, and you should too. Let's welcome him today. Dario, I'm so glad that you're here.
Hello, everyone. So exciting to be here. And thank you so much, Gail and Ashley, and everyone for welcoming me here to speak with you all. Oh, hi. Oh, cool. The chat is alive. Here we go. So today, I'm going to speak a little bit about my path, right? Like, how am I even doing all of these things? You'll see it's actually all pretty much the same thing that I've been doing for a very long time. And then also, I will give a little bit of one of my classes, actually. So I'm also a professor at Parsons School of Design, and there I created a course called Decolonizing the Gaze: Fashion, Race, and the Aesthetics of Visual Design. So really looking at the image as not benign, and defining the image as not just still or moving images, but anything that falls on the retinal plane. So that includes the built environment, architecture, urban planning, and anything that just hits the eye. So I'm going to go, it's going to go fast. And then we're going to open it up for questions, because I really, really can't actually wait to be in dialogue with you. So cross your fingers. Here we go. All technical bugs are at bay. First of all, I need to find Keynote. Okay, here we go. Sharing my screen. Can you guys see the screen? Gail, we good? All right, perfect. So I think it's always good to start at the beginning. So this is me with my family, just a young Black boy from St. Louis, Missouri, in the Midwest, grew up in the suburbs. And what I love about this image is that this is actually an image not only with my family, but also shows the clothes. And these clothes my mother made. So my mother was a nurse and a seamstress. My father was a pastor and a substance abuse therapist. They are still alive, they're just retired. So that's where the was comes from. But in this image, you can really see the core of who I am and how I came to be. Growing up, watching my mother sew these fabrics late into the night, watching her create my sister's debutante dress. But then at the same time, on Sunday, understanding like the power of presentation, the power of the theatricality of the Black church, and then also like this messaging of service. And so like those base notes will actually resonate right throughout my career, and you'll see how they start to develop and build on top of each other. But what was interesting is, I grew up in the suburbs and went to predominantly white white schools. So this is on the left, my elementary school photo. And then on the right, you can see, well, maybe you can't see me. It's like, where is he? I'm right there, smack dab in the middle. This is me in concert choir. And, I was a curious student, right? Like, I've always been curious. I've always been really eager to learn. But what I was learning was about like a rote American culture, right? But never really learning so much about myself. Anything that I found about myself or anything that I read didn't look like me, right? So I was reading Wuthering Heights, and I couldn't necessarily find myself in a Wuthering Heights. We weren't reading Zora Neale Hurston, Their Eyes Were Watching God. And the reason I bring things like this up is because it really inputs, right? Like, we can only be as good as the inputs that we have, right? Our outputs. And so through this story, I'll show how as I changed my inputs, it started to change my outputs. But anytime I heard anything about myself was always confined to like 28 days at the beginning of the year, right? Black History Month. And it was always Martin Luther King and it was Harriet Tubman, right? So it was always about, this struggle, but it was never about, James Baldwin or Bayard Rustin, right? And as a creative, I was always looking for myself. And, although I understood Martin, I didn't quite align with that, right? And although I understood Harriet Tubman, like I couldn't quite find myself. And so my life and everything that I've really been up to has been in a search of permission, right? A pathway to being, finding that mentor, finding that reflection of somebody that looked like me, right? I wasn't, an incredible singer, and I wasn't a basketball player. This was me. This is who I was, right? I was that geeky kid with the robot and the connects. And why this photo is interesting is my father sent this to me a couple of weeks ago. And, I find like a lot of kids are in two camps. Either you're the Lego camp or you're in the Connects camp. And I loved Connects. And it's interesting because to be in design now, I can look back at this photo and see that this was something I was interested in actually a very long time ago. And then there was performance, right? So I graduate from high school and I become an actor. This is me in Cats on the left, and on the right is a picture of me as a character, Delphina Treadwell, while I was in undergrad school at a small Jesuit school in Kansas City. And, I loved performing, right? I enjoyed it immensely. And here, actually, I'll give you a quick snippet of me in Broadway's Aida, but performing in Beijing.
I grew up in your hometown, the least began to grow. I hadn't got to my first shave before the body glowed. Egyptians in the courtyard, I found the chains. You witnessed our abduction, which possibly explains how I know.
And as much as I loved performing, I always felt like I wanted to give more, right? Like, I could help someone forget about their problems for a couple of hours while they were at the theater, but after the applause, right, after the curtain call, they still had to go home. And for me, I really wanted to reach beyond just the stage. Like, I wanted to have a real palpable effect on people's lives. And so my love affair with the stage began to wane. Now here, as you can see, I'm actually in China performing. And at the same time, I had brought a camera with me. And so at the same time as I'm performing, I'm also learning this other medium that allows me to begin to tell my own story. Enter photography. So as an actor, I didn't know what to do with this camera, right? Like I was just playing around. And so I just came back and started taking pictures of my friends. I just started taking headshots, right? How can I help people further in their career? But it's really interesting. I began to see that the camera was actually a tool, right? It was actually almost a bit of a therapy or a technology of becoming, right? And so I could see and shoot someone where they wanted to be, right? Not exactly where they were, but starting to signal for not only themselves, but also the world where they wanted to be. But I also kept wanting to say more myself, right? I kept hitting walls with the lens. And so I wanted to say more. So I started moving into more fashion, right? Where I could start to really tell my own stories. And this is actually an image that I shot when I used to wait tables, right? And I was waiting tables at Soho House. And I shot this in the spa overnight. So that's actually a steam room to the left, but they were quite generous and would let me kind of take over their spaces while they were between shifts. But also I began to tell stories of the incredible individuals that I met, the individuals that did not make it to my history books, but who I felt were leading extraordinary lives, even if they were just ordinary people, and even if their lives did not fit within, the demands of capital that fell along the traditional channels of distribution or exhibition to make it to my textbook. I felt that through this lens, right, like through the camera, I could begin to tell those stories. I could begin to populate that landscape of mentors that I was looking for such a long time, and began this series called From the Pool of Black Genius. And, for instance, this guy, Ronald White, who was actually the first Black man to be on the cover of GQ. And I found that to be fascinating, right? But without this story, without this image, who in Ohio would know that this man even existed, right? Who in Mississippi would know that there was this man, Ronald White, who pushed, coming from New Jersey, who pushed and fought just to be on the cover of GQ, and what that means, right? What that meant for a Black man to be on a magazine cover that was touted as, the top of men's fashion and lifestyle and culture. Also, in that series, The Pool of Black Genius, I began to photograph a woman in Harlem called, her name is Lana Turner, and she is a doyen of style. And like any character on a sitcom, she actually began her own spinoff, right? So she became her own series unto herself, and it became extremely popular, featured in Vogue and W and The New Yorker. And then through Miss Turner, I encountered the mentor that I'd been looking for my entire life. A person who was moving through the world in a multivalent and hyper-curious way, who was undefinable, and entered Jeffrey Holder. Jeffrey Holder, who was a sculptor and a painter and a dancer and a singer and an actor, and a costume designer and a director. And it was through my encounter with Jeffrey, I was able to finally see myself. Here, many people may not know who Jeffrey is, but you may have heard of The Wiz, which is the all-Black version of The Wizard of Oz, for which Jeffrey was both the costume designer and the director. And he actually won a Tony for Best Director, becoming the first Black person to win a Tony for Best Director. And it wasn't just in encountering Jeffrey, but it was also encountering his loft full of books and scripts and costumes and paintings and sculptures. And all of a sudden, I saw how much input it took to create an output like that. I saw that what Jeffrey left behind, because he had now since passed, what he left behind was a roadmap, was a blueprint to creativity. And after he passed, I worked with his widow, Carmen, to keep the books together, because I was like, we need to give access to other Black and Brown creatives to this information, right? This is, again, is about shifting and changing those inputs. So after a course of 3 years, I did finally get those books, about 2,000 of them. And I began working on what eventually would become the Institute of Black Imagination. It started out as the Holder Center for Black Imagination, and is now the Institute of Black Imagination. And speaking of books, there was one book that really touched me, and it's called Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. And in it, he says that the burden of liberation is on the oppressed, not the oppressor, because only the strength built by being oppressed do you have the power to liberate everyone. And I just found that fascinating. I was like, well, first of all, wait, the burden of liberation is on the oppressed? Like, haven't they suffered enough? And he goes on to say that, the act of liberation is not about a transfer of power from the oppressor to the oppressed, because they just become the new oppressor. But it's about a restoration of humanity, because by restoring humanity to those who lost it, from which it was taken, you also restore humanity to those who lost it in the taking. And so through this book, I began to see that, this act of liberation was actually a co-creative act, right? And that even, notions of, in this country, how it manifests as white supremacy, that this is not a one-sided exchange, but we're both losing out here. But then I also began to look at the world around me and see that it actually has been the oppressed, it has been the marginalized that have allowed for other groups to be a bit freer, to move through the world a bit easier. For instance, the gentleman dancing shirtless on parades in Chelsea every June would not be there if it were not for two trans women of color, Marsha P. Johnson, who started the Stonewall riots movement in the 70s. That white women are actually the largest beneficiaries of affirmative action, that the Southeast Asian cab drivers who won't stop for me in New York City actually would not even be in the country if it were not for the civil rights movement, because immigration reform was on the back of the civil rights movement. And so this idea of the burden of liberation being on the oppressed was something that really stuck with me. And as we move forward through my career, I began photographing, but then also began directing, and began directing the fashion shows for the brand Pierre Moss. And it was here that I began to see the combination of all of the things that I had been, let's just say, up to, right? So the singing, the acting, the dancing, the character development, fashion, performance, production, all comes together in these fashion shows. But not just that, also my psychology background. And I realized that fashion and the fashion show was just a frame, right? Like, it is just the spectacle. But how do we then subvert the spectacle? How do we then hack it? How do we then jerry-rig it in order to fill it like a Trojan horse with the messages that we want to relay? And so it was actually through Pierre Moss that I began to really infuse the fashion shows with a messaging, with a level of storytelling about the Black experience through the lens of fashion. And not only that, I was able to fill it with my own background of growing up, listening to Stevie Wonder, and growing up in the Black church. And so I was able to even bring gospel to the runway. And here is a small snippet of that. And now, how does design come into this? Like, how does this fit? And so as I'm directing these shows, I've done with acting, still shooting, I go to Athens, Greece. And there, I was there for a design fellowship through the New Museum. And while I was there, just really during a random conference, I heard a phrase that all design is predictive. And this completely shifted my lens on the world. All design is predictive, meaning that the designer is dictating or predicting how the end user is going to engage with any given design. Rarely is there a modular or an adaptive function on the user end. And what that opened up for me was a complete lens shift on the world. I started to see that, just like I'm sure the chair that you're sitting in, the glasses on your nose, Gail, I'm looking at you, the scarf around your neck, everything that we see, the table you're sitting at, was just once an idea in someone's head. Every single thing was simply ethereal. And through design, and I define design as any technology to bring thought into space and time, through a pencil sketch or a computer model, right? That thought was then made manifest and the materials were brought together, and here it is. But what I began to see was that not only had the world that we live in been designed, but that we were just living in embodied ideals, essentially, right? And when I realized that the world we live in has been designed, then the next question is, well, then who designed it? And what was the intention behind the design, right? And when we speak about design, I'm not speaking just about like the physical environment, but that goes for social design as well, right? The ways in which we interact with each other, even redlining. And not only had it been designed, but it was designing me, right? It's designing us. It's determining how our bodies are to move through space, what bodies are more valuable or less valuable. What does gender mean? What does it mean to be a man or a woman? And how do we then fit or not fit within these existing paradigms? And we really began to see my own frustrations with the world was essentially me just dealing with what I thought was shitty design, right? Me being stuck in a traffic jam in Boston at 11 a.m. for no reason on the way to the airport had not much to do with my lack of planning, but more to do with crappy design, right? Crappy urban design. And the ways in which we are constantly fighting and trying to remix and hack these design systems that actually flatten us, right? Because they were designed before we got here, but was not designed with us in mind. And so much of our lives are about a negotiation with pre-existing design elements. And so how does that manifest? Well, for me, I wanted to provide, right, a level of access, from the archive, and then understanding that the burden of liberation is actually on the oppressed, and that the world we live in has been designed, and saw that Black and brown individuals, out of necessity, have continually jerry-rigged and hacked and remixed these design elements because they did not map on to our lived experience, right? If we forced ourselves into these design elements, we would literally die and starve. But in that process of jerry-rigging and hacking these design elements, we've not only brought about our liberation, but the liberation of others as well. And now enter the Institute of Black Imagination.
To design a way out of this exclusionary system, we need blackness. As expansive, complex, and diverse as the cosmos, as graceful as the way we move through spaces. It's alchemy, transforming base materials into cultural gold. It's subversive, hacking a world not designed with us in mind. It's exploration, seeking infinite possibilities. It's reinvention, it's world history, it's the way forward. Welcome to your Black imagination.
And so what began as an archive from Jeffrey Holder has now expanded. while I was waiting for the funds to actually create a physical space to house the books, I launched the podcast in May of 2020, actually during the George Floyd protest, even though I'd been working on it for a year. Earlier this year, we launched IBI Digital, which is a digital version of what will be the physical archive. And again, thinking about access from the genesis of design, making sure that those who physically can't make it also have access to that material, and also in a way that is quite liberative and exciting and exploratory. And actually, it's up right now. You can go to your phone and just type blackimagination.com into your browser, and you will find all of it. And then also announcing and letting you guys know that in a couple of months, we'll actually be having our physical space at the Oculus in World Trade Center. So here we have the podcast, which you'll see is actually a continuation of the photo series I began, 12 years ago, that was called The Pool of Black Genius. So through the podcast, doing actually the same work and allowing people from all over the world to have access to these incredible individuals to find their own mentors. And this is a short video that shows you what our digital platform looks like and how we built it. And not only that, as we move into our physical space, we have also done, all of the branding where we will actually house the Holder collection there in its entire physical form. And so really looking at this entire pathway, right, which was a series of inputs that was prescribed, right, pre-designed for me. And my path of shifting all of those inputs, shifting those references, and doing, I think, some really kind of tough work just to find myself. But out of that own frustration, creating an organization like the Institute of Black Imagination, so that other people don't have to work so hard. And this is an example of how those references manifest, right? This is my cover for Vanity Fair with Viola Davis. And not only was it in reference and in response to the protests that were happening here in the US, but I also used references, right? References that were not in my history books. Like at the top, you can see the work of Lorna Simpson and the ways in which she used indigo, or in the bottom left, Alma Thomas, the abstract painter, or to the bottom right, Carrie Mae Weems. And so when I approached this, also knowing that, I'm not a Black woman, so I looked to see how other Black women represented themselves. So the back turned to the camera, this rich color of blue is something I was looking at, but also using this as an opportunity to speak about American history, and an American history that we're still fighting to tell, actually, to this moment. And that is by design, right? That's by design. But just wanted to give you a quick glimpse into how I came to be. So that is the end of part one. Gail, how are we doing? Is there a little room?
You could go on for a long time if it was up to me. I don't see any questions. I do see one question. Did you go to Rockhurst by chance? It looks like Dan Abrams grew up in KC.
That is correct. Ding, 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 Rockhurst.
Awesome. And then really, Makiba, she gives you a shout out. So that's all I can see here. Lots of adulation for what you're doing. Someone asked, can you talk about your work with Lightroom? That was one of my questions also. How
Can I
has
talk
your work,
about?
how has your work with Adobe kind of changed the reference for photographers?
Yeah, my work with Adobe was really exciting. I'm gonna stop sharing. Also, really quickly, I don't know, did you want me to talk about like decolonizing the gaze,
I
or
really want you to, yes,
do you want
yes,
to
I
open it
really
up
want
to
you.
questions?
Yeah, I want you to. I thought we'd ask maybe one or two questions and we can then launch into that. Or if you prefer, we
Okay,
launch
cool.
into this first.
Yeah, let's do a couple of questions to kind of break it up, and then I'll launch into that, and then we will ask and see if any other questions come up. So what was the question one more time about Adobe?
Adobe, your work with Adobe, how has that changed or influenced photographers, the craft, what's happening? Because prior to, I mean, I know about film work. Kodak didn't even have film that resonated with our skin tones, right?
Yeah.
So how does a lot of students don't even know that. I bring that up to my students when I'm talking about photography and color. And now we're looking at Adobe and Lightroom. How have you influenced the craft?
Well, I think it speaks to design, right? And the ways in which we can only be as good as the tools that we have to use or to design with. And then we have to then consider again, who designed these tools and what was their intention behind the design and the ways in which the design left certain persons out because they were not a part of the equation. And so working with Adobe, one was incredible. They approached me and two other photographers to develop a set of presets specifically designed for people of color. And I think that really gets to the heart of it, that people of color were at the center of the genesis of the design, right? We're centered in the design elements. And so there's a lot of nuance that went into the designing of presets, particularly looking at undertones, right? Looking at the channels of yellow, looking at the red channels, and even sometimes like the blue channels and the ways in which they can render darker skin sometimes lifeless. And Adobe's intention or Lightroom's intention is to make it so that amateur and prosumer users just have a good head start in the direction that they want to go in, right? And so if we have a set of presets that are specifically designed for people of color to enhance, right, the nuances of their skin, then that just makes it a little bit easier, right? Because I think it's also understanding the world in which you find yourself. Not everyone is sensitive to the nuances of every single thing. And so how can we as designers, as creators, make that pathway just a little bit easier for others to enter into this work? And how has it influenced? I mean, I can't speak to how it's influenced like photography, but I will say I am always getting like DMs and messages, photos of people who are using the presets who really love it. And for me, like, that's it. It's just a starting point for people to just really begin to understand the nuances of darker skin tones and how to bring out the beauty in them.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Absolutely love it. Now we need to make monitors and screen coordinate with all of that. And let's see, a lot of people are saying they love the idea of decolonizing the gaze. And so we want to talk a lot about that. And then what do you use to create your interactivity? I went on your website today and I said, okay, you have to be really smart to kind of get into that space. But I guess I'm smart because I got into it. I got into it. I totally got it. I was like, whoa, this is cool. So are you programming?
What was the question?
Are you programming in C++, Java? How are you managing the
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, I'm not doing anything. Like the coding, I'm up here saying like, can we do this? Is this possible?
It's brilliant. It's brilliant.
So if you saw from the video, we were actually 16 of us designing the site all together, and me kind of as the creative lead. And we were designing simultaneously between New York, LA, San Francisco, Sao Paulo, Uganda, and Nigeria. because I also wanted to have a diversity of Blackness, something that we call decentralized Blackness, on this project. What we were using is WebGL. So that is what creates like the gamified aspect to the site. And that was also a part of the design conversation, right? Again, thinking about access, what we were building looked like it needed to be an app. And one of our builders from Sao Paulo said, well, if this is for Black people, I'm here to tell you, there are Black people in favelas in Brazil who don't have cell phones that can download apps. They don't have the data. They don't have the cell phone range. And then another person on our team said, well, we can actually create a website that behaves like an app. And so by actually just designing it in WebGL, it completely got rid of like the socioeconomic divide, right, between OS and Android, but then also these other requirements of, again, data and memory. So you can really use it from a cell phone, a tablet, anything with a web connection. So how do we create a gamified, tactile experience that is mobile friendly and mobile first? And even that little puzzle in the beginning is deliberate, right? It's not difficult. Like it's
not difficult. No, it's not. It's not.
But what's cool is like it really kind of, one, it's meant to engage, right? Because so much of what we consume these days is just very passive, right? And that's kind of what decolonizing the gaze is about. Like if we're not actively participating in the images or the things that we consume, then we can passively just let them wash over us and unconsciously agree to them. So the puzzle is just to bring you to the present. That's all. It's just to engage your mind. But then as you figure it out, like, you know, you try all of these different things. First, you're tapping. It's really fun to watch people try to enter. And then there's that moment when you get it, right?
Very feel accomplished, simple. And you feel really accomplished for doing that.
And that's it, right? It's that dopamine hit that we're after, right? The dopamine hit of curiosity. So how do we give people back their curiosity? We do it from the very beginning. And on the other side of that is this entire world, you know, of information for you to discover. But people bring themselves to it like any other design element. You know, can get frustrated. Maybe you put it down and come back to it with a fresh mind. Maybe you ask someone, how do you get in here? Or maybe you just give up.
Right.
And I find that that's usually that even just that puzzle will speak to how we approach the problems in our lives.
That's true. So we have a question. What advice would you give educators preparing the next 10 of design professionals?
The next 10 years?
10 years, I think, of design professionals. Next generation of design professionals.
You know, it's interesting. I always say at the end of my podcast, stay curious and keep dreaming, because I think that gets down to the heart of it. You know, I believe fundamentally that we come pre-programmed with a set of interests and desires that shift and change, right, as we encounter different things in our lived experience. But I believe starting with like a broad swath of just things, right? You know, painting, sculpture, art, literature, and seeing how they inform each other and letting the student self-regulate, self-guide. I mean, I think what's interesting about this coming generation is that this is a generation who's been able to granularly explore their interests from a very young age. So they can just get on Google, they can go on YouTube and find out everything about anything that they want from a very young age. So by the time they're 20, a lot of times they have a really good idea of the things that interest them. But then also letting people know that it's okay to be a generalist as well. I think we're really moving out of this place of specialization, or at least this kind of silo way of not only educating, but moving through the world. And as we all become singular entrepreneurs, right? Like I'm sure many people here are doing multiple jobs that they did not start out doing.
That hyphenated human being.
Yeah, and so that these things actually inform the other, right? Like so, for instance, if I said, okay, I'm going to direct fashion shows, right? And then so I studied like directing and stage, and fashion. I'm going to direct a very specific and maybe flattened level of a fashion show, like one that's easily understood. But it's actually through my exploration of literature, psychology, performance, singing, dancing, playing the piano, that singularly makes the shows that I direct mine, right? It's like my stamp. And so as we educate like the next generation of creative professionals, it's letting them know that it's okay to bring themselves along in the journey.
Got it. A question for the Q&A. Talk about your work with Alvin Ailey. Those are some beautiful photos. I mean, you got some iconic the Blackish, Alvin Ailey Company, Chris Rock, Viola Davis, of course. Your images are iconic.
Oh, thank you. My work with Alvin Ailey is incredible. So I've actually been working with Alvin Ailey for 10 years. So through my own photographic journey, there was a portion of it that I was also shooting events. And the Alvin Ailey Gala was the only event that I shot every year. And, as a dancer, and as an image maker, for me, it was like that perfect marriage, creatively, but then also to show that, through all of the machinations of American politics and culture, that Black folk were having a good time, right? That they were beautiful, well-dressed. And last year, Alvin Ailey reached out to have me shoot the campaign. And that for me was just incredible and exciting to, one, be in the canon of, the images, the iconic images, those iconic Ailey posters, but then also, again, to bring my history to this image, right? So I'm there able to communicate with the dancers in the dancer's language, right? Because I was a dancer for such a long time. And so it was really a beautiful marriage of not only like longstanding relationships, but also, my own history and, curiosity.
And I mean, Jeffrey Holder, beautiful dancer, big, beautiful dancer. That must have been really great to kind of bring his spirit into the work.
And a gift, a real gift to be able to work with these established Black institutions like, a Blackish or Alvin Ailey, and to help, show them in their best light and tell their story.
Yeah, beautiful. I don't want the time to get away from us, so please go on with your next presentation.
Oh my God! Okay, I'm gonna fly.
No, we've got some time. It's 6 o'clock. We've got about 10 minutes.
Are you kidding me? Okay, so I'm gonna go quickly. I love this. So this is actually the first presentation I give in my course at Parsons as a way to see how we can decode images, right? How we can decode culture, how we can decode the spectacle. So without further ado, Blonde Ambition, the Kendall Jenner story. So picture it, April 2017, an extremely tone-deaf ad featuring reality star and model Kendall Jenner. Several think pieces have been created or had been written on the inherent problem of commodifying a social movement to sell soda, especially when said movement is in response to the extrajudicial killings of Black men and women who are actually noticeably absent from the storyline. However, there's one thing no one has cared to unpack: her hair.
Some say never, but they never done come. Yeah, and took our drugs. It's been winning, but the lovers ain't done. Yeah, not on my watch. Yeah, if that took all my rights away. Yeah, if that telling me how to pray. Yeah, if that won't let us demonstrate. Yeah, wrong. We are the lions. We are the chosen. We gonna shine out the dark. We are the movement. This generation. You better know who we are. Who we are. Yeah, if I some set fire when the fire was ice. No, I'm so alive. If that took all my rights away. Yeah, if that telling me how to pray. Yeah, if that all I was in the train. Yeah, yes. Living the common reply. All of the lion prescribe. Working so hard to unite. United we tired of lies. Tired of lies. We are the lions. We are the chosen. We gonna shine out the dark. We are the movement. This generation. You better know who we are. Oh, we are the lions. We are the chosen. We gonna shine out the dark. Yeah, we are the movement. This generation. You better know who we are. We are the lions. We are the chosen. We gonna shine out the dark. We are the movement. This generation.
So let's quickly recap. In the spot, we see Jenner during a high fashion shoot, sporting a blonde bob and metallic bodycon dress, as a protest of sorts is happening in the street. Beckoned by a hot Asian cellist, she decides to join the revolution and is temporarily transported into a wind-swept photo studio, then rips off her blonde wig and tosses it to a Black girl, revealing her raven-colored tresses, locates a denim outfit and a Pepsi, and walks to the front of the protest, hands it to a super cute police officer, and saves the day. Well, let's chat about this. Images matter. We take our cues regarding the world and how we relate to each other from visual media, which in turn defines, and reinforces stereotypes. From an early age, images like the flaxen-haired Princess Aurora in Sleeping Beauty or the sable mane of gypsy dancer Esmeralda from Hunchback of Notre Dame, our young minds absorb and accept subtle visual cues. Well then, what is Miss Jenner's hair saying in the Pepsi ad? Well, it's seemingly benign, but what's coded in this narrative is really a division of labor, both physical and emotional, that blondes live a life of leisure and brunettes get to work. The former is taken care of while the other takes care of business. The acts of erasure in this ad are legion, but the blonde, beautiful, brunette, smart trope violently erases the lived narratives of both the intelligent blondes and the lazy brunettes. Is it true that blondes have more fun? Is the tagline in Miss Clairol's 1950s advertisement for at-home hair color, one of the first of its kind. Hair color preference typically shifts with culture, but since the 1950s, the blonde has become the standard of beauty on American soil. According to research by Melissa Rich and Thomas Cash, in which they documented over 750 covers of Vogue, Ladies' Home Journal, and Playboy over the span of 40 years, they found that the percentage of blondes represented in magazines far exceeded the percentage of blondes, naturally occurring blondes, in the US population, with a considerable blonde skew in Playboy magazine. But why blondes? And why then? And by then, I mean the 1950s. Surely stars like Marilyn Monroe and her predecessors Jean Harlow and Mae West had popularized the image of the bleached out pinup. But if we shift our cultural binoculars slightly to the right, you'll find that at the same time, some troubling narratives were pouring out of Germany that give a certain primacy to blindness. Oh, sorry, blondness, not blindness, blondness. Culture does not happen in a vacuum. And notions of a master race having a certain look cannot be divorced from a growing preference for blondes in a collection of states who concurrently were grappling with their own race problem. What could be less Black than a blonde? Take the 2014 movie Lucy, in which a blonde-haired, green-eyed Scarlett Johansson absorbs a nootropic drug and gains superhuman powers. In one scene, she travels back in time to the first bipedal hominid, a primate named Lucy, purported to be the ancestor of modern humans. And they have this E.T. finger touch moment, as if to say, look how far we've come. But back to Miss Jenner, a seemingly simple plot line with a protagonist arc defined by a change of hair may seem innocuous, but it is far from innocent. It's coded oppression that plays out in real time. In a study done by duo Matz and Hens, blondes are actually perceived as more physically attractive, healthier, and younger than brunettes. And at least one study has also reported that blonde women receive a higher wage premium compared with women of other hair colors. Now, while brunettes are perceived as smarter, more trustworthy, and less promiscuous than their fair-haired counterparts, they don't have musicals written about them. Outside of the blonde-brunette divide comes another pivotal moment in the ad, the wig toss. Any anarchist of might knows that it's like really hard to revolt with blonde hair. To this end, our heroine, Miss Jenner, casually appropriates what I like to call the symbolism of becoming real. The transgressive act of wig removal is a trope well used and documented in Black culture, as shows as lowbrow as Jerry Springer to the dramatically crafted How to Get Away with Murder, the wig snatch is a moment that symbolizes what I'm about to do is so important, I'm willing to risk my carefully crafted persona. It usually precedes an ass whooping, but is actually a performative trope.
There's no need for me to go.
A performative trope rooted in Black queer ball culture when a drag queen removes her coiffure with a wig cap, hairpins, and makeup line exposed to show all is just an illusion. The thing you've come to know and love is just a mask. In the Pepsi ad, Jenner actually risks nothing. No bobby pins, no false lash removal. She seemingly and seamlessly moves from one carefully crafted persona to another. Her transition, lacking a physical embodiment, is instead depicted via a set change and a wind machine before joining the revolution in Pepsi Blue denim. The irony here is that she actually performs a reverse drag of sorts. The pretty, vapid girl getting her picture taken is actually much closer to the Kendall Jenner we've come to know, while the metamorphosis into a concerned, conscious activist is where the performance really begins. She takes off the wig to become something she's not. And to be clear, this is not a pointed indictment of Jenner. There were multiple levels of meetings and choices and decisions made before she even arrived on set. No, she's merely the vessel, a carrier host for hire, transporting America's social ills in a carefully crafted package. She's complicit, but not fully responsible. And who is responsible? Well, we all are. Both the creator and the consumer have a responsibility to the image. The former is charged to make deliberate choices, aware of the weight and power of representation. And the latter, the consumer, is charged with being well informed enough to critically engage with what is presented before them. That which is not challenged is accepted, a passive agreement. The choice has been made for you. And that said, I'm off to the drugstore to pick up a box of SB2 Ultra Light Cool Summer Blonde. I need a raise and somebody to buy me a cocktail.
Oh, it's great. Perfect timing. And I think as educators, we need to make sure that our students are making those right choices as consumers and also as creators. Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.